Are you feeling overwhelmed by your emotions? Do you simply feel them like a torrent of things that don't let you be? Well, things are so because, well, they actually are so. Emotions and thoughts are kind of the same thing. They both are a river that flows. The point is, the more you take in, the more you take out, because what people don't understand is your purpose here is to be a recording camera. You are here to simply record some events and, well, your physical body, as it loses its capacity to hold life, there will be the moment when life will simply leave the physical body. So, the so called quest of life is to make sure that you record as much of this world, which is technically gonna be part of your so called awakening, but at the same time release that which you don't need. Because people create emotional and mental attachments. And when that is created, those are like frames. A frame means a rigid structure, and that rigid structure holds the emotional and, well, let's say the mental attachments. It is just like stars create. It is enough that, for whatever reasons, two atoms of that dust cloud or nebula, it is enough that two atoms start a gravitational dance that simply creates a form of attraction which will draw in more and more of atoms, right, and molecules, and in time will form what is technically the very tiny core of what's going to be a star. And this takes years, thousands of years maybe, and when enough mass is created, the future core of a star will create, which will create even more gravity, which will draw in a lot more matter. At least that's what I understood from science. Now, as that happens, right, the point is the more you think, the more you put emotions on something, you create further layers for that frame. Technically, the star is basically the karma that keeps the planets around. The same way goes through the emotions that you attach towards something. Don't forget that psychology says every time you think of something, you think of the last time you thought about that idea, not the first time. It's the last time. Because when you think of something, you're gonna feel biased again. So you're gonna put an extra layer of emotions. So that is why people unfortunately end up believing or feeling that something is much worse than it initially was. That is the problem with attachments. It is exactly like with buildings. The more bricks you create, the more layers you create, the more intricate they can be. But the more intricate a building it can be, the more intricate a prison it can also be. Don't forget we exist in a concrete jungle. The point of a concrete jungle is it can provide safety if it is used for, or it can provide control if it is used for this. Don't forget, everything that you build is physical, because only physicality can be built. Your emotions and your thoughts are also physical, much less perceivable, much less, well, let's say much less perceivable, but they are still physical. They can be shaped, they can be shifted, just like when you speak a certain truth, when you speak a certain speech, and you are, well, let's say authentic, you can simply shift some of people's perceptions because you are capable of piercing through certain layers and, well, through higher levels of spirituality, you are even capable of breaking other people's karma. The question is whether it is needed, because having a lot of power means also having a lot of responsibility. Your thoughts and emotions are kind of the same, but they are basically fully connected. Because when you are sad, you can't think of something necessarily happy. When you are happy, you can't necessarily think of something sad. So, how your mental state is, your emotions will be similar. The only difference is that the mental field is highly vibrant. The mind can easily shift from one idea to another. The emotional field is very sluggish. When a certain emotion settles within you, you probably are well accustomed to the fact that it's gonna take a while till it simply lifts, or let's say goes away, right? So the point about this is just any thought, any idea, it doesn't matter how perverted it is, it doesn't matter how disturbed it can be, okay? Those ideas are there because they don't belong to you. You took them from the realm of creation, which is an external source, or you took them from other people. Remember that the very moment you are around people, your auras overlap. So the aura, think about it as the junk field that surrounds the Earth. The junk field is comprised of all the parts left out of space structures, usually satellites or, well, space debris and the such. That's technically like a spiritual card for whoever is capable of reading you, not your aura, reading you can understand a little bit about you through your aura. The aura is way too vast for most people to simply read. Just because you can see a certain color, it doesn't mean shit. Many people misinterpret those colors, but, well, it's up to them. Everyone learns things at their own pace. So the point is, irrespective of uh, the thought of what it is in your field because it came from an external source. The point is, you can also create your own ideas, but the mind will create based on its own capacities. So the point is, you can create based on the mind that you have, and let's say you can create correlations at most, because that's how languages were created, right? People were capable of creating sounds, so they created a certain meaning. Meaning can be created by you, but the problem is that meaning is yours only. If you spread it and you create a certain set of rules, right, based on that, then you have a certain language. But again, a language can be used as a boundary or as a communication method, a method of communion. Take for example English. It can be used as a boundary for because those who don't know the language are somewhat, you know, bound not to understand it. But people who understand it and it's spoken worldwide can actually understand things much easier than through the language of their own countries. Because there are so many languages, right, that are spoken in their own countries. Take, for example, Hungarian, or there are languages which are now spoken worldwide, like, well, more or less Japanese and Chinese. Japanese ain't necessarily spoken worldwide, but thanks to anime, anyone, and to internet guides, anyone can understand at least the basics of the language and some parts of the vocabulary. When it comes to emotions, it is the same thing, because emotions are just an energy that flows. Your perception of those is unique because it is your own meaning. When you feel happy, right? Happiness is a perception of yours. It is your own meaning. A disturbed person may feel happy when they are killing someone. You may feel happy when someone gives you something. A people pleaser will feel happy when they see other people fulfilled. And someone who is authentic but at the same time generous and has the capability to do so will feel happy when they give to others. The difference in between them and a people pleaser is the reality. The person who's generous and can afford, well, they can actually afford. A people pleaser will try to offer even if they don't have, because they are destructive. They are technically, well, it is, let's call it a very important spiritual stage. Because, well, it's what I call the black hole stage, but everyone has to go through stages of deconstruction and reconstruction to perceive certain things. So any time a thought or an emotion flows through your mind, it doesn't matter how demented or perverted or whatever it may be. Just let it go without judging it, because your first impulse will be to fear, right? There is no problem in letting it go, because you're technically leaving structure that you do not need. Any structure that you keep with you, you will also take that beyond this life. So the problem is, you will spend more time shifting through all the shit that you have acquired throughout lifetimes of existence. A little story said that there was this king, or a very important person. He was gifted with the fact that he knew literally everything that happened in his previous 3 lifetimes. Now, the point is, having suddenly realized what he did in those 3 pastimes, he did everything he could to rid himself of that karma, of anything that he accumulated in those 3 lives. But still, there were things in his life that he could not control. So he went to a sage, to a wise person, and asked them, why is it that these things actually I cannot control? And the sage asks, what are things that you have done in your life? Well, I have done things in my life, but I have cured myself mostly of that karma. That does not belong to these lives, to this life. Well, how about your past lives? Well, I have seen what I've done in my previous lives, right? He says my previous lives, not the last three, because in his perception, his three previous lives were the only ones that he knew he had, so he didn't know he had more. The sage was knowledgeable of this, but you don't present the things specifically to a person because you're technically ruining their realization. You're telling them one thing, but you're just guiding them slowly to the realization. That is the point of wisdom. You're guiding people to realization through the meaning that they use, because their meaning is not your meaning. It may be common in some cases, but their experiences are not yours. Your experiences are not theirs, because ultimately experience leads to meaning being formed. So your meaning will always be different than other people's meaning. That is why languages are important for communication, because there every meaning is or should be common. Even if nowadays people are kind of silly, they are using words their meaning they long ago forgot, or they simply don't realize. Because when you learn a language in school, you learn it ignorantly. You learn it ignorantly from your parents as well. That is why you have people swearing on the internet. Because they are full of toxicity from other people, yes. But they are not realizing the destructive or the constructive potential of words. Because they have not realized that. Learning things in ignorance disallows realization, which also keeps you away more or less from your spirituality. So the point about realizing things is just like the sage said. You are capable of knowing what you have done in your three previous lives, but what about the other thousands of lives that you may have lived? So the question is, you will be influenced by a lot of impulses. Those will come from other people you have stood around. It is not their fault that you stood around them. It is not your fault that you stood around them. You took certain things because your karma allows that. So use your karma as a way to simply improve who you are. Use it as a means to realize what your situational flaws are, because your karma attracts certain things. So it means your karma is basically a guide out of your misery, out of your suffering. Because your karma is basically a city. It is an aspect, a labyrinth of hidden things. Guide yourself through that, through your impulses, because they are the way that shows you what you have to cure. If you learn this internal language, which is different in a way for everyone, but at the same time it is the same to all of us, because I will always say we are all the same, but not in physicality, because that is where the structure is differentiated, but we are just life force, and life force is all the same. It is the same that comprises stars, because ultimately we are also stardust. We come from the matter of stars. We come from black holes. We come from this universe itself. So all this being said, just let things flow through you, because ultimately they are just like a river. You can build a dam and hold it, but the point is, if you harness energy and you allow it into you, there are certain ways through which you can indeed make that energy influence you in better ways, like arising the kundalini within you, which is basically the only way that you can store energy within you. But at the same time, storing energy requires one to be an alchemist, because alchemy is the third level of awareness in which one realizes that their boundaries are, well, something that they can turn into something good. Because if you have energy, it can be also energy that is not useful to you. Realizing that is very important, because you can do things to turn the negative outcome into positive outcomes. You will not shape fate, you will just shape how things influence you. Because what can come as a great disappointment may actually be a very good protection, because something worse may have happened. You are appreciated. Take care. Ferenc Board signing out.